On to today, our speaker is Bruce Mainzer. Bruce, after getting a master's degree in transportation from Northwestern, worked for 10 years in public transportation, including stints with the Chicago area RTA, Illinois DOT, and Metro North Commuter Railroad in New York City. He is currently the co-chair of the Chicago chapter of the Climate Reality Project, also a neighbor of mine. Bruce Mainzer.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. As Bob mentioned, I am the co-chair of the Climate Reality group. I am the co-chair of the Chicago Metro chapter, and we are a bunch of advocates and activists who are focused on climate change education and advocating for climate solutions. As many of you know, because I know you've received presentations in the past, the Climate Reality Project was started in 2006 by former Vice President Al Gore. The Chicago chapter was created in 2017. It was one of the first local chapters in the US. Now there's like more than 120 local chapters, not only in the US, but across the world. And our chapter has had a number of successes. Mainly, our most recent successes, we were the leading advocates to have the city of Chicago file a lawsuit against major oil companies. We've written legislation so that no more fossil fuel or diesel buses can be purchased by any transit agency within the state of Illinois after 2026. So we've had a number of successes, and we got Pace to totally electrify their fleet. They committed to that just a couple of years ago. So you're going to see a fully electric bus fleet by Pace. We haven't been as successful with getting CTA to change, but we're working on them. So today we're going to discuss the climate emergency we're all experiencing now and what you can do. Now, we believe that there are many choices that people make to reduce their carbon footprint. Many people, have given up on red meat, in addition to the fact that maybe their doctors are telling them to give up on red meat, as well as trying to drive and fly less. But by far, the most effective thing you can do is to get rid of your fossil fuel machines. And in this presentation, I'll be presenting how it's so important for us to make a commitment to, once that machine reaches the end of its useful life, that you replace it with a machine that's running on electricity, because it's not only more efficient in terms of emissions to run on electricity, but also the electric grid is improving with more and more renewable energy. So this is the key to combating climate change. So I'll be discussing that. So first, just a few slides on what's the source of the climate change that we're experiencing now. And if you pick up a newspaper or watch any news program, what we're experiencing now is an everyday event. And climate change is basically due to the fact that we have this thing called the sun, which we require for our daily lives, that powers everything from photosynthesis in our lives. And since the Industrial Revolution, what has been happening is we're pumping carbon dioxide, additional gases, into our upper atmosphere. And these gases are serving as a block towards heat, the necessary amount of heat leaving the Earth. So basically we have what's called a greenhouse effect, where we have too much of the we're getting enough solar radiation for our lives, but we need to have some of the solar radiation leave the Earth. And as time has gone on, and as we have been using our cars or using our fossil fuel machines, this carbon dioxide has been building up and is preventing the heat from leaving the earth as it should. So we need to do everything in our power to prevent this shield from increasing. And right now, it's very scary what we're seeing. Scientists already believe that we will far go beyond the amount of warmth in the world, 2.5 degrees centigrade, that was signed at the Paris Accords. We're going to blow right through that. But it's important that we all have a stake in trying to limit this kind of heat. So, Al Gore uses this slide a lot, and I think it's very powerful. We are spewing 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into this thin shell of our atmosphere every 24 hours. It's astounding. So we've been treating the sky like it's an open sewer since the Industrial Revolution, and it's getting out of control. This is a quote from James Hansen, who in the late 70s, early 80s worked for NASA, and he was one of the first people to warn U.S. Congress that we are experiencing a major climate emergency. And he basically came up with this figure that the energy trapped by man-made global warming pollution is now equivalent to exploding 600,000 bombs of the Hiroshima era, atomic bombs, per day, 365 days per year. So that's the amount of energy that is not being allowed to leave our Earth's atmosphere by this shield. It's very scary. So what has happened? Well, you're all seeing it today. When I used to give this presentation a few years back, maybe you would have a hurricane or a flood once every other month. That was astounding. That was a once in a 100-year flood. And now we're getting it seems like on a weekly basis. Every time I give this talk, it seems that there was a major hurricane, and there indeed was one. Helene, I think. It wasn't Helen. And that hurricane was very interesting because the west coast of Florida was never built to withstand hurricanes, because they never thought that a hurricane would form in the Gulf. But because the Gulf is so warm now, that you're getting hurricanes, very powerful hurricanes. And I believe this was a Cat 4 when it hit, Category 4 hurricane when it hit the area, I think, next to Tallahassee. And it's caused massive disruptions far away from where it hit landfall. It did a tremendous amount of damage in Florida with the surge of water along the coast. But I cannot believe the amount of damage it's created far away, all the way up into Tennessee. So I have this thing which just shows what goes on in Chicago. And this happened a couple of years ago, where raw sewage was pouring out of sewers in Chicago. And what was interesting is, remember the Deep Tunnel Project? So that Deep Tunnel Project was designed, I believe, in the 60s and the 70s. And it's massive, to build those limestone caves, or to use those quarries to store the water that hit Chicago. And scientists have already said that it's not capable of, now with the new reality that Chicago has with rainstorm, that is under design. And it was one of the largest public works projects in the US. I think it was only over $8 or $9 billion was spent on that. So, I mean, it's still important, but it's not going to save us from the floods. And then, of course, and then, of course, you have the wildfires, which this year, I believe, is hitting Canada and California. In years past, we've had, I think last year, we had Western Canada and Eastern Canada. And nobody can escape the impacts of this. We had tremendous amount of particulate matter in our skies last year. It was dangerous to go outside. I believe schools had to cancel in Chicago Schools had to cancel outdoor activities during the day while these fires were going on. And it's just going to get more and more worse. Just more and more of these. Yeah, so this is just the statistics behind what happened in 2023. And more than a third of the US population faced many days of dangerous air quality because of it. And then, of course, you have the floods. This only goes through 2020. And it's off the charts this year. I mean, I recently came back from vacation in France, and what I noticed about the media there is they're not talking about the US and what we're experiencing. They're talking about what they're experiencing in Germany, where the world no longer knows where all the floods are occurring. There was major floods in India and Bangladesh and in several countries in the East, and the newspapers here never mentioned it. I mean, there's just too numerous to mention in all the newspapers. Last year was Earth's warmest year, and we're on record to make 2024 serious. So what's the solution? So the solution is to stop burning fossil fuels. And here in Illinois, we have a number of ways we get our electricity. And one of the most, the worst area for pollution, the single source of the worst site in Illinois is the Prairie State Energy Campus, which is still coal burning. And a number of communities have signed up for this. One is Winnetka. Another, I don't know if Northfield's on Winnetka's power system, but they signed up for power from here. And we also have most of the rest of the grid, if we're using a fossil fuel, is probably using natural gas. Oil is not that big a driver of electricity. But the key is we've just got to stop burning fossil fuels. So I want you to think that when we talk about solutions, the oil and gas industry is always positioning themselves as their part of the solution. And we need to simply state, no, you're not. And one of my favorite ruses is the natural gas industry. I mean, they actually renamed themselves as a gasoline that sounds kind of friendly, natural gas. In essence, natural gas is methane gas. Methane gas is 88 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide when it's in the atmosphere. So this is a very serious gas. So anytime you are at home and you think, you know, I have a natural gas furnace or I have a natural gas stove and it's slightly better than carbon or coal or oil. Not true. Methane is an extremely dangerous gas. So where do greenhouse gases come from? So I put up this slide so that people have an idea of what is the problem. And this is from the US. And basically you can see that transportation is 28%, the generation of electricity is 25%, and residential commercial is 13%. Now, agriculture is 10%. So this includes the methane that's coming from cow flatulence, as well as how the earth is tilled and losing carbon through the way agriculture is done. And then industry or factories is 23%. And the reason I show this slide is many people think that the emission problem is one for factories or corporations or whatever. But in essence, it's really our daily lives that is creating a huge proportion of these emissions. So for example, if we look at transportation, that 28% pie chart there, our personal cars, our light duty trucks that are personal, not run commercially, are SUVs and sedans that are owned privately that we're using to, go grocery shopping, take vacations, go to work or whatever. We're 60% of that 28% slice. Our cars, not, trucks from the military or whatever. These are household cars. Now, if you look at electricity, the 25% slice of electricity, 70% of that slice is used to power our homes. And then if you look at residential and commercial buildings, the emissions from those are mainly the furnaces that are used to warm the homes. So gas furnace. On the East Coast, I think you still have oil furnaces. So the emissions from that is 13%. But residential buildings, that is our homes and our apartment buildings, form 50% of that slice. So if you add up the slices within those slices, you come to a figure that 42% of all emissions result from decisions that are from our homes. So trust me on this, 60% of the transportation slice and 70% of the electricity slice and whatever, it ends up that 42% of all emissions result from our machines that we own in our homes or in our garage. So there's this wonderful statement from a really good organization called Rewiring America, which I'll give you a link to their website later. And this is what I think because this is so important, I'm just going to read it. 42% of all emissions result from decisions that are made at kitchen tables. That includes the cars we drive, as well as how we heat our homes, heat the water in our homes, cook our food, and dry our clothing. Now, if we electrify those things, we have an opportunity for financial savings on the order of $1,800 a year on average across the US per household. And with the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in 2022, the average American household has an electric bank account. It's got over $10,000 on average in it to help people electrify their homes. Now, here's another quote from the same organization, and I think it's so important I want to read it as well. As we discuss what we need to change in our houses, be aware that I am not telling anyone to go out and buy new appliances now. Instead, we should all be aware of the fossil fuel machines, cars, gas furnaces, stoves, hot water heater, gas range, and stovetop that are operating now in your household. It's important that once these appliances or cars reach the end of their useful life, whether that will be in a couple of years or let's say 10 to 12 years, because you just recently bought a gas furnace, for example, it's critical that you be ready to replace that machine with a machine that does not burn fossil fuel and continue to contribute to the climate crisis. Because when you replace your car or your gas furnace with another gasoline-powered car or a newer gas furnace, you are committing to another 8 to 12 years of burning fossil fuels as long as that apparatus is operating. And that is a huge problem for the planet. And it also commits you, in many cases, to continue to pay higher utility costs or expensive gasoline to power your car for another substantial period of time. So I don't know if I read this already. Oh, well, so this is another statement from this organization. So, and they estimate that we need to install 1 billion new machines or 50 million machines a year for the next 20 to 25 years to get on a path to reducing our dependence on these emissions and these fossil fuel. So one of the things about this statement is that we all have a responsibility to do this. We all need to think about this every time we make a decision in our lives to use a fossil fuel machine. So So I did want to look at electricity and basically say, a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, I don't understand. You're going to replace your machine right now that's a fossil fuel machine, but you're going to power it from the grid, and we're burning fossil fuels in the grid to that creates emissions. So where's the savings? Well, there's a number of reasons why there are significant savings. One is that the grid isn't all powered by fossil fuel right now. In fact, we are in the RFCW grid, that includes Ohio and parts of Kentucky, I believe. If you can see that, you can see the Chicago areas on that. And that grid right now is kind of average for the US. 63% of that grid is powered by fossil fuel, which is bad. But the remainder is now powered by either renewable energy, solar or wind, or nuclear, which is, there are many problems with nuclear, but in this current crisis, it's something we got to keep because nuclear doesn't create carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. But then there's another reason that we need to think about this from an efficiency point of view. And I'll take a car as an example. Did you know that when you put gasoline in your car, 2/3 of the generation of heat and whatever that is created by using gasoline in the car is totally wasted? So your car is only using 1/3 of the energy that's created to propel the car. Now, compare that to a fully electric car. An electric car uses 70 to 80% of the emissions, of the energy to propel the car. So right now, even if you had an electric car that was powered by on the grid, there's no grid like this in the US, but hypothetically, if that grid was 100% powered by fossil fuels, that car that's charged from the grid, that's 100% fossil fuel, would still be more efficient and waste less energy than a simple gasoline powered car. So that example of a car is replicated within all your apparatuses. Every time you have a furnace and you power, you turn it on, much of that gas or emissions are wasted because of the inefficiency across the board of that compared to having a central source and using electricity. By the way, one of the cleanest areas is, do you see the grid that's the cleanest up there in New York State, upstate New York? Do you know why? It's a nuclear and hydro, Niagara Falls, and the Northwest is pretty clean too because of all the hydropower. So it's important that we now think about how we can make the changes. And I'd like to show this, that, every time we take an action, and I see this in my neighborhood, where somebody decides to put solar panels on their roof, and then somebody will come by and say, wow, what'd you do there? And I could see a year later, a neighbor down the street has put solar panels on their house. So, while what you're doing may seem small, we all need to encourage each other to adopt this as a philosophy. And to me, it's similar to voting. Your vote might not by itself might not mean the difference in this election, but over a lot of individual actions, we can be very powerful in what we can do together. So to basically try to encourage this movement to live your life and to make choices that reduce the greenhouse gas effects, we at Climate Reality have come up with this electrification we call a pledge. And it's simply, as my home appliances and vehicles reach the end of their useful life, I pledge to be ready to replace them with electric alternatives and to encourage my family and friends and community to do the same. So what are the choices to electrify in your home? So this is a graphic of the most important things you can do. One is to put on solar panels, obviously electrify your vehicle. Another big one is heat pump instead of a gas furnace. And I'll go over some of these things. And then you also have electric clothes dryer. And if you can't put on solar panels, there's also always the option of signing up for a community solar program. But before I go into some of these impacts, I'm a visual thinker, so I want you to understand the metrics that I'm going to use. And one of the metrics I use is how many metric tons of carbon dioxide, usually on a yearly basis, a certain appliance is creating, that you're creating. And this has always been very helpful for me. 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide is about the size of a 2-story home. 28 feet high, 28 feet deep, 28 feet wide, cube. So there are 124 million households in the US, and each household is creating 20 to 30 metric tons. So think about your home. That's how much gas you're creating, 20 to 30 of these big blocks that are floating up into the sky and are preventing radiation, solar radiation from leaving the earth. So here are the key electrification projects. I mentioned the first one, home solar panels. Before installation to power your home, depending, this is for an average home, so you could be more or less depending on the amount of usage you create for electricity in your home. But let's say it's 4.6 metric tons a year. You can get that down to practically zero. A lot of people I know are actually selling back the power that they create on their solar roof back to the utility. So that's a savings of 4 metric tons. That's huge that you can save. Electric car, electric car is still going to have emissions from the grid, but you're talking about a 3 metric ton savings. Replacing your furnace is another biggie. 3.4 metric tons can be saved in an average home if you replace your gas furnace with a heat pump. And by the way, a heat pump serves as both an air conditioner and a furnace, and I'll detail that later. And the final one is kind of similar to a heat pump. You can heat your water in the same way with an electric heat pump, and that'll save about a metric ton. So if you put that in a graph and you see the blue bars are before the change and then after the change, you can go from a house. This is a house with only 1 car. Obviously, if you had more than 1 car in the house, it's going to be more. But you can go from close to 19 or 20 metric tons emitted per year. I want you to visualize that cube, and per year, that household putting those big cubes up into the air. You can bring that down to only 7 metric tons. So that's a major change. So that's part of the 42% of all emissions that we're creating. So solar power for your roof, I think it makes a house look nicer. As I mentioned before, the emissions will vary depending on your starting point with your electricity supplier and your rooftop capability. By the way, I can't put solar power panels on my roof of my house. And the reason why I have these things around my house that we refer to as carbon sinks, otherwise known as trees. And we should not be cutting down any trees. So instead, I participate in community solar, where I sign up for a farm. This farm is in Bourbonnais, Illinois, where the Bears used to practice in the spring. And there's many of these farms being set up all through Illinois, and I subscribe to them. And they've designated how much power I'm going to offset by subscribing to one of their panels that they have out there. And then I get credits from ComEd for that participation. So I'm not saving as much money and not saving as much greenhouse gases as if I had solar panels on my actual home, but it's still a very good deal. I'm paying about 20 to 30% less for electricity than you would if I was buying straight from ComEd. So I encourage everybody in here who's not done this and can't put solar panels on their roof, just consult with your village or city website. They'll have all sorts of information on what are the community solar providers. There's new ones being set up in McHenry and Lake County now. And sign up, and it doesn't cost you anything, and it basically saves you money. So it's a no-brainer. By the way, that last thing I presented, I accidentally left this on the slide. I was giving a presentation for Winnetka, and remember I talked about Prairie State and how the community signed up. Those guys are so evil that they're not allowing anybody in Winnetka to sign up for community solar. It's terrible, terrible. So because they want the money. I mean, they basically are trying to hold on to as much of people's monies as possible. So it's a really bad thing. So if anybody here is from Winnetka, somebody should, and they're up for a new arrangement or a new contract extension. And there's many people in that community who still believe that their electricity is more reliable coming from a coal plant than it's just terrible. And I used to live in Winnetka, and one of the reasons for that is Winnetka at the end of Tower Road had their own coal plant for many years when I was growing up. And that feeling of independence and sort of saying, we have our own utility, is what Prairie State has taken advantage of, even though Prairie State is, I think, near East St. Louis, the actual plant. So a solar panel cost and payback, basically the rebates that you can get and the tax credit that was in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act allows you to get immediately up to $10,000 off the installation. A typical installation would be $20,000 to $30,000. So this is $30,000. You take $10,000 out, and then the state of Illinois will give you another $10,000 for future credits for the power that you're going to generate and sell back to the power company. So the total cost is $10,000. Even if you don't have that $10,000, you can go to a finance company and say, instead of paying my electrical bill of whatever you pay a month, $120, $150, I'm going to finance the $10,000. And banks will do that for you. So you can continue to pay. You'll pay off the $10,000 in like 7 or 8 or 9 years, paying what you normally would pay to the electric company instead to the bank for the final $10,000. After 7 or 8 years, you have totally free electricity. That's huge. So you should consider that if you have a roof that isn't covered by shade. And this is the website for community solar. I've already talked about this, but I would urge everybody right now, because this is free money, go to your local community village or city website and find out the companies offering community solar and just sign up immediately. It's easy, it's painless, and you'll save at least $30 to $40 a month, if not more. So, electric vehicle. We drive a lot of miles, and so 81% of all vehicle miles driven in the US are for our personal use. Obviously, that if you remember the figure I gave you, that 60% of all emissions are coming from us, not 81%, and that's because the emissions coming from large trucks are, bring that value down a little, but it's still significant. And then I like to bring this information into fold, and this shows you the difference in emissions by car, and the bars are for CO2 emissions per mile, but I like to look at the bottom where it says the metric tons per year that are emitted, and I want you to focus on, obviously a gas car is going to have the most metric tons. Hybrids bring that down a little, and a plug-in hybrid brings that down a little more. But an electric vehicle is by far the best. And then if you take if you have an electric vehicle and you're on solar power, you can get far under 0.63 metric tons a year, which is basically the additional emissions that were needed to create the car. It's amortized over the life of the car over 10 to 12 years. But this shows that why electric vehicles are so important. One of the reasons people ask me, well, hybrids are just as good. Not in my opinion. And the reason why is that you see the red bars, that's the tailpipe emissions. Those are never going to change. So even as the grid gets cleaner and cleaner with more renewable energy, if you're driving around with a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid, you still will not have any improvement in emissions from that car. It will still run on the same technology and be emitting carbon. The other thing is people say to me, well, I'm concerned about range. I said, well, if you can power in your home, I have 300-mile range with my car. So why, I only take one long driving trip a year, and it might be a limiting factor then. But other than that, I have a much better life not having to go to gas stations or whatever. But plus, with a plug-in hybrid and a hybrid, these cars are more expensive now than electric cars. Why? Because to purchase. Why? Because you're paying for two technologies. You're paying for the propulsion system for an electric car, and then you're paying for an internal combustion engine. So over time, I think people will start to realize that hybrids are not an effective solution for your daily needs, just from a cost perspective. But the U.S. is not doing well in percent of vehicle sales. We basically have we're basically at the bottom of all the countries in terms of their new sales to electric. A lot of people say, oh, electric cars, I'm worried about the winter. Really? Why does Norway say? Norway now is number one. And by the way, Norway now is 50% of all the cars in that nation are now electric, and they will be totally electric in just a few years of all their driving. And then you have Iceland and Sweden. So the cold countries seem to love electric cars. And then the states, there are about a dozen states that are phasing out electric cars by 2035. GM and Ford were all signed up for this. Lately, they backtracked a little. In my opinion, GM and Ford are blaming the consumer, when in essence, I blame GM and Ford because they have basically, when they first introduced their electric vehicles, they tried to mimic Tesla, and they mimicked it with high prices. And Tesla's already exhausted that luxury car market. And their role was to come out with an affordable electric car, and they blew it. And so now Ford is going back and redeveloping a car that in 2026 will be much cheaper. Meanwhile, the Chinese have developed very cheap cars, some between $10,000 to $15,000 that you can buy, and they're very popular. Of course, the US has some security concerns and some anti-dumping concerns. So 100% tariffs have been put on those cars, so they're not going to sell here. But to me, this whole transition to electric cars, we're having a hiccup right now. I'm confident that it will improve in the future, but I blame the auto manufacturers for the problem here. So there are some tax credits that are available for electric vehicles. Unfortunately, they become less prevalent because so many of the batteries and so much of the car assemblies are occurring outside of the US, and now with the tariffs and whatever. So they're less of a factor, but it really doesn't matter because new electric car prices are coming way down. And you can get them for under 40,000. And then with the tax credit of 7,500, these are very nice cars. And then, as I mentioned, Ford should be coming up with a $20,000 to $25,000 vehicle by 2026. But even without the tax credit, EVs, in my opinion, are still equal or better credit. So I did this a little analysis, and you can see the fuel total. This is over 5 years, and you can see that it costs far less to power a car. And even these estimates are high because it's based on a mix of public and private charging. Private charging, which I do almost 95% of the time in my home, I have even far less fuel costs than whatever this figure turned out to be, $800 a year. I think I pay less than $200 or $300 a year to fuel the car. And then these other costs like maintenance and repairs. I'm on my second EV. I've owned the EV since 2020. I've never paid a dime for maintenance or repairs. About the only significant investment is for new tires after you've driven 50,000 miles. But so these figures are even very conservative for the savings. But if you look at the Kia Niro Electric, which doesn't receive a federal incentive, it costs the same as a Nissan Rogue without the federal incentive. Now, it's so hard to understand the federal incentives that since I did this slide 2 weeks ago, they announced that the Kia Niro will now get the federal incentive. So it's going back and forth depending on the regs. But I don't want people to focus so much on it because you've got to look over the total cost of ownership. And the total cost of ownership is that these are much nicer cars. If you've ever been in a VW ID4 or Kia Niro, it's a much nicer car than a Nissan Rogue. Apologies to those people who have bought a Nissan Rogue. So there's also a tax credit available at the dealer and for used cars. And then this is my baby right now, my Mustang Mach-E, and it's a blast to drive. It's very fast, but I'm not going to say anything about how it drives. And it's advanced technology for safety and comfort. And it's a really nice car. And I put the racing stripes on it, so it makes the car even faster. So quickly, I'll just go through other things you can do in your home. One is the heat pump. A heat pump works just like your refrigerator. Basically, there's a gas in there that when compressed creates heat, and then when it's brought outside and it's expanded, it takes heat out from the outside. So if you put your hand over the fan in your refrigerator, you feel heat coming out. Well, that's how a heat pump works, and it works. The process is reversed in the summer. So the indoor condenser becomes the evaporator. And I just came back from Europe, and it seems that everybody in that country has this. Heat pumps are not exotic technology. And again, we're battling the natural gas industry or methane gas industry as if these things aren't reliable. They're very reliable. And if you use it for your refrigerator, you can use it for your homes. So it's got a tremendous amount of savings, as I mentioned before. And there's 3 types of heat pumps you can use. One is where you just put like an air conditioner outside your house and it uses the outside air temperature. And yes, even if it's a 10-degree day or a below 10-degree day, there's heat in the atmosphere that it could use. So a more expensive version is to run piping through your backyard because the temperatures in the ground are moderate. And so there's more heat in the ground even during the thick of winter. That would be more expensive, but that is an option. And the third thing is to have a standalone unit. And this is what I see in a lot of places in Europe, or people use it here when they put an addition on their house, and it works as both an air conditioner and a heater. And you're going to save a lot of money utility-wise because it's so efficient. There's no burning of fossil fuels. There's no wasted heat. It's just basically using electricity and a compressor and an expander, I guess, like what you have in with your refrigerator. There's great rebates or incentives on it from both the utility company and the federal government. So it's something you should seriously consider. Heat pump water heaters, similar. It uses the same principle basically to heat the water, or it draws in heat from the outdoors and through the same process of reverse refrigeration, so to speak, it'll heat your water, and that'll save significant amount of greenhouse gases, over 1 metric ton per year for the average household. And this is just how it works. I'll just skip through this because it's not important. Now, there's other electric utilities that you can use, that you can put in. Clothes dryer, induction oven, induction stovetop. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think they're great appliances, but from an emission point of view, unless you're running a laundry out of your house, or you do a lot of cooking on your stovetop, it's not going to save that many greenhouse gases, but you might want to consider it because, for example, the heat pump clothes dryer, it's a much better way of drying your clothes, because what it is it works on the principle of removing the moisture from your clothes, not to bake your clothes. You know, think about it. We're baking our clothes. Of course, they're wearing out, but this is more like a dehumidifier, and it does a great job of drying. So next time you go to replace your clothes dryer, don't do it for me. Do it for your clothes. Don't do it for the environment so much, because it's not going to save that many greenhouse gases, but it's going to make your clothes last a lot longer. And then you have the induction stove. And, in terms of indoor air pollution, gas stoves are a major cause of indoor air pollution. If you've had a kid with asthma and you're not venting the stove, it can be pretty hard for that kid. I believe it's nitrogen oxide that's created through the gas, the burning of the gas, and particulate matter. So it's these induction stoves where you can turn it on and the heat is transferred into the pot. You have to have a magnetic pot, and the heat is or pans. The heat is transferred directly into the food. So if you were to take the pot off and just touch the burner, it won't feel hot, because it's transferred through electrical waves. So it's much safer, and the control you have on it, despite what you're hearing in the newspapers, is actually very precise, because once you turn it off, no more energy is being transferred into the pan or pot. A lot of tax credits available. I'm not going to go through it all, but the Inflation Reduction Act made getting these heat pumps and solar panels very easy. Once you go to a website, a very helpful organization is this website, Rewiring America, and they have fully signed up to electrify everything in your home. So to wrap up, it's basically our choice of how we want to live. And, I personally switched to an electric car. I remember in 2020, because of the wildfires in Australia, I just felt terrible about all these destruction out there. So I linked personally in my head the emissions that I was creating with my cars with these disasters. And so if I've done anything in this meeting, I hope you can link your own behavior to what is happening around the world and make a contribution. So here's the pledge. We also have another pledge. We have it on our website, the Climate Reality Project Chicago Metro chapter. We also have a pledge that I call our Activist Electrification Pledge, which is, if you want to get interested in this, please join. I encourage you to join our organization. And we have this additional saying: I will encourage my municipal elected officials and staff to provide information on federal, state, and local incentives on their website and at community events, and I will support informing businesses, institutions, churches, and libraries and senior centers on the benefits for electrification. So if you're interested in this, you like to testify at hearings or talk on radio stations, I encourage you to join our organization. So that's it, and I guess I'll take questions. I'm sorry I only left 5 minutes for questions.
First of all, thank you so much for your program. It's extraordinary.
Thank you.
What we need is a better picture of what you want us to go to. You went through so many slides and you offered so many tactics for us,
Right.
or places to, but none of them is available to us. How do we get them?
So, I mean, I think the first step is to take an inventory of your own home. What fossil fuel machines are operating in my home? And
what I'm talking about is the link you were offering.
oh, the link. I'm sorry.
It's up there.
Sure. I mean, I don't have the exact link, but if you Google Rewiring America, that organization, all the information will come up in that website. Okay, and but just to follow up on that other comment, I think part of the pledge is to take an inventory of your home, understand what's the next fossil fuel machine, from your car to your gas furnace or whatever, you're probably going to have to replace, and then start reading up, going to Rewiring America, start to see what incentives are available, what tax credits are available, so you're ready. And just an additional note, often when you hire a heating contractor, they're going to try to tell you need to buy a gas furnace. You need to be really hold your resolve, because they're in the business of selling their own gas furnaces. So, okay.
I had a related question. The Inflation Reduction Act, as I understand it, allocated the money, but then the states are supposed to do the administration and distribution. I've gone to the Illinois EPA and other organizations. There doesn't seem to be any way to apply and get funds for these projects. And as far as I know, the state right now still doesn't have an operating way to, get your $800 for your stove or these other programs. So to me, it's worthless. It's nice to know there's an Inflation Reduction Act. I have no way to access the money.
For automobiles, it's nothing to do with the state. That's all done federally. And I believe for the solar power panels, that's fully in place right now. And so there might be some issues with heat pumps, but I think they're rolling out. So your comment is a good one. I think for heat pumps and water heaters, there might be some issues, but also you have ComEd that is providing some benefits right now as well.
Bruce, we have several questions from Jeffrey Landsman on Zoom, and we have some little time, so I'm going to go through them one at a time. Does it seem necessary to have a more effective infrastructure for recharging stations before electric cars become more practical?
So I look at this based on your living situation. If you're living in an apartment in the city of Chicago, and your building doesn't have any hookups or whatever, I would say that yes, we need more infrastructure, but 90% of the people who own electric cars can charge easily at home, and that's what I do. I have a dryer line that I didn't even have to put in a new line. I had a dryer line in my garage, and I use that to power my car. And I've never had to go to a gas station since. And so the only time it's a problem is my one road trip a year. I did take a road trip to my 50th college reunion, and it was no problem because it was in New York State. And so if you're going along any highway right now, there's no problem. Any major interstate, there's no problem right now. So the only problem is really if you're taking a vacation to remote areas like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there's a problem. But that's like 1% to 2% of people's driving. So rent a car. Other than that, you're going to save a lot of money, and the infrastructure is there if you charge from home.
Another one from Jeffrey. What about the practicality of mini nuclear reactors? Is that coming, or is that something that on nuclear? What's happening to improve that area?
I'm not an expert on that, but many people have stated that unlike Europe and China, we're not taking advantage of the solar power capacity we have in the U.S. And it's a problem in Illinois. ComEd has actually not been a very good actor in promoting these community solar farms. They're making it difficult to sign up to the grid, but there is a lot of wind and a lot of solar that we can put on that can take over from fossil fuels.
Oh, okay, in interest, we'll just take a question for myself, and we have more from the audience. The question I have is this. You're talking to a group of seniors, and when we talk 20 years out, it really makes a lot more sense to be talking to my granddaughter and grandchildren. Yet, when I see the political landscape, what concerns me, and I don't want this to become a political question, but how do we see young people clicking and seeing this as a problem? I mean, we see the concern. Do you see young people sharing that concern? Because politically, in some cases, they seem to be anti-government, anti-systems, and not leaning towards what I would call a liberal view, but a more conservative view on energy. What are your thoughts on young people?
Well, I don't know too many conservative young people. It's just the type of people I hang out with. But I like to tell the story of my son. And my son said when the Inflation Reduction Act passed, he said, it's meaningless for me because Biden is talking about us consumers And the problem is industry and the big powers. And I said, no, you can make a difference. And I had to go through this presentation with him and say, you know, you're driving a 20-year-old Chevy Impala. You don't realize how much you're polluting. And you think you're saving the world by composting. It's not, composting is not going to reduce the, make a significant difference. And it's not, don't complain about the celebrities flying their private planes. It's less than 1% of carbon emissions is caused by air travel. I know each trip is highly wasteful, but it really comes from the fact that 90% of us are getting in our cars every day and driving miles, or heating our homes with extremely inefficient furnaces. And that's where the figures are. And so I was able to convince him. Of course, he's my son, so I was able to convince him.
Haven't Congress, hasn't there been bills entered that would mandate the end of coal burning and eliminating coal burning?
Yeah, there are bills at the state and federal level. Unfortunately, we in Illinois, the specific thing I know of is that Illinois passed a very aggressive environmental bill. I think it's the initials are CEJA. It was the Clean Environmental and Jobs Act, I think is what it was for, what is passed. But there was a carve out for Prairie State because the people who built Prairie State 20 years ago didn't want their business to go away. And that has been really damaging. But Illinois has banned any other coal factory. But unfortunately, I live next to a rail line and I see Illinois coal being shipped up to the Wisconsin. The nearest plant to this location is a coal plant. I think it's in Racine, Wisconsin. And that's a coal plant. And we just got to find a way to stop Illinois. And we're submitting legislation to stop Illinois from selling coal. But there's political interests and economic interests that are trying to stop that.
Okay. We have to call it here. Thank you.
Okay.
We are over time. Bruce, thank you very much for both informative and important presentation.
Thank you.